Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad. And sitting across the table from me today, we have a very special, first-time ever in-studio guest, as studio such as it is here in my basement.
In studio.
Is Mr. Phil Berg.
Hello, Sam, and hi, Dan, and thanks for having me on.
Sure. The esteemed Phil Berg. I think I have some car and drivers from like 1991.
Yeah.
With your byline in them. Yeah,
that's it.
I mean, not to make you feel old. That's what I say. Esteemed.
They call it elitist. I talked to Eddie once about who's the editor now about the difference between those days and now the internet days. And some young guys told me, they said, what's the difference between an elite journalist from back then and a journalist today? And they told me that a journalist back then had to ask permission to write something. Now everybody just writes and just throws it out there. Watches for click counts, and that's not how it was back in 90. I started at Car and Driver in 90, but I had been at Autoweek for about 10 years before that, so I'm really ancient here.
Well, I mean, it used to be different. You used to have to pitch, right? And you still pitch now, but also you used to get paid. Mm-hmm. We don't get paid anymore.
We're expected like the $0 car. We're expected to make our revenue from some other source.
It's like musicians. Musicians today. They may record an album and put it out there on streaming services and get paid a couple of pennies for every million streams. But it's only when they go out and play live and sell T-shirts and CDs and stuff that they actually make any real money.
Yeah.
Such as it is.
It's a brutal business.
Yes. So, let me think, just to continue on to bring you to present, after I had 10 years at Car and Driver, and then I went out on my own freelancing, mostly because I had two kids. So, and that was something I wanted to stay home and be the stay-at-home dad, which we can do as journalists. So,
I will say, though, like, how do you find that trying to be a journalist and write with kids around? Because I find it nigh impossible. I have to wait till they go to bed, and then I fall asleep on the laptop.
No, most of the stories I wrote were done on the couch in the den in front of the TV while, Lion King was playing, or Fox and the Hounds, or some Disney DVD or something like that. And so, it was basically that way. And I can't tell you how I did it, because I look back and I wrote 5 books, and 3 of them were, I don't know, it's 80 or 100,000 word books on garages that I did. And I did it with kids in the room. I don't know how that happened. And maybe that's explaining how they've turned out today. They're in their 20s and they're young adults, and they're forging ahead here through the economy. But it was an amazing blur of activity.
Speaking of those books, why don't you tell the listeners who may not be familiar with them a little bit about, especially the garage books. It's a very interesting series that you've done.
Right. I had done a story at Car and Driver, I think it was 98, and it was called Reader Garages because we had this 10 Best issue every year, and it was readers sent in pictures of their garages. We solicited for that, and so I wrote the story on that after they came in, and I was fascinated by it, and I just thought, there were people who had half of their houses were filled with cars. There were people who had 7, 8 cars inside their homes, and they were readers. And I thought, something is sort of needs to be exposed on this. And so it was about 4 years later, I pitched the idea to Motor Books publisher, and And they thought, well, okay, we don't really know what it's about, but we'll let you do it. And most of the guys I talked to about garages, I said, I want to I want to shoot, make it a photo book and get some great big, coffee table photos of people's garages. And most of the garage owners looked at me and said, well, okay, we'll take all the cars out. And I said, no. And I said, the point of that? And they said, you could shoot the cars outside in the driveway. And I said, no, I want them the way they are now. And they really didn't get the concept. And it was really tough to find some. But a lot of guys, Ken Gross and the Peterson Museum guys helped me out a ton because they knew sort of what I had in mind. And so they told everybody and opened some doors for me. And it was really great what they did. And so I kind of, after I did the first few garages, I came up with a description that going into a garage and seeing all the different cars that people collect is kind of like going into a conference room and having sort of like Gandhi and Einstein and a whole bunch of people from different periods all sitting in the same place. And with those groups of non-related cars from all sorts of periods, it actually added something to. They're all related, but they're also different, and just to collect them all in one place, it seemed to be a hit. So I did three of those.
What was your favorite? What's the favorite garage, or I guess let's do it this way. What was your favorite garage, and then what was your favorite collection or individual car that was unexpected?
Wow. I mean, it was, I'm just trying to think. It's kind of, again, like asking who's your favorite kid. But anyway, we all have them.
Quiet one.
Yeah. So I guess the favorite garages I had were the ones that guys could live in. And that was, well, let me think. There was a guy out in San Diego who had a car up on, it was he had a house on a hill, and it had this like huge swimming pool with a grotto like the Playboy Mansion, and then his garage was there, and then he had a bedroom in his garage, and then he had like a pool hall built in his garage, and it was, then next to that were all the cars, which was about 20 cars. And he also had a yacht that he built himself, and it was in the garage. It was really tall, and parked under the yacht was a Lotus, and so I mean a new one.
Like an Elise?
So yeah, I think it was an Elise. Yeah, and so it gave scale to the yacht because it's a tiny car, and the yacht just looked massive. And I shot it with this huge wide-angle lens, like a 12 millimeter or something, and so it was very strange. And I think that was in my second book. But there's been so many. I had, in addition to the 3 books I did for about 7 years, I did a monthly garage story for Auto Week. So I've been to 220 or 230 garages all around the country, and including Nicola Bulgari's garage in Rome, in Italy. And that was fantastic. He has an apartment in it, and he has a room filled with 300 model cars he collected as a kid. Tiny little HO-sized ones, and he remembers being 6 years old and loving these models. And I'm thinking, this is a serious car guy,
Yeah.
So anyway, I could ramble on and on and on about all of that, but it was about a 10-year period. I did nothing but garages, it seemed, and I actually, at the same time, I was working with Sam, and when he was running green fuels forecasts and those newsletters, and so that's where we met and had some fun adventures with that. And,
the Audi mileage marathon.
Yes. That was crazy. So that was crazy. And actually, before that, we had been, let's see, we were
the Storm Chaser thing.
Yeah, we were doing the Hummer. Hummer gave us a car to join a 100-vehicle flotilla of scientists that the National Science Foundation sponsored. For 2 months, we went out chasing tornadoes, and we used this Hummer as a vehicle to drop instruments in the way of tornadoes and to chauffeur around other journalists. And so the backseat had people from Sydney Morning Herald, from Science Magazine in the UK, which is like our Scientific American here. And we had a Scientific American journalist and a National Geographic journalist, and they rode with us for 3-4 days while we chased tornadoes. And it was great because we got to see the science people and what they thought of cars, because these were all meteorology students and professors and really good experts at weather. And one thing I found from that is that wind farms in Texas that generate electricity change the weather. You can see them on the weather radar maps. You can see where the wind farms are because they slow down the wind. So there's no free lunch getting electricity. It's you put up a big wind farm and it changes the weather. And
so does it change it
when we put up solar panels? How much do you think we drop the temperature of the sun's surface?
I don't.
You know what? That's okay.
There's a little bit to spare there.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that it's probably not as great as wind. You know that the solar panels are much smaller than turbine blades, I guess. So I don't know, but there's something there. In a I guess a molecular level.
It's interesting. I wonder whether it changes the weather for better or for worse, or that remains to be seen. It's just different.
Right. I mean, I don't know what a city would do. Like, obviously, the wind in Chicago and New York is changed. It's not the way it used to be before they built those cities, if that is a constant. But, there were patterns, and patterns always change. So I'm not sure they know that yet. So it's all theory, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah. Well, as Phil was speaking, I looked up Ultimate Garages on Amazon, and you can get copies of all three of those books on Amazon.
Really?
Yeah. In fact,
used ones.
Yeah. Well, there's a copy of Ultimate Garages 3 available for sale for $1,401.25.
You know what? This is funny. I came back across through Canada last summer, and I was out at RM Auctions at the headquarters having a tour of their shop, which is beautiful. And that's for a garage story. But I was coming back across, and they picked me out. I had a Kia something. A Hyundai Ioniq. And so it had weird plates on it. And so they picked me out to go through the search function at the customs, and so they scoured the car, and I went in and they scoured my records, and that's exactly how they looked up to verify who I was. They went on to the Ultimate Garages on Amazon, and the guy said, used ones of these are selling for $160. The customs agent told me that.
Yeah. Well, there's a copy of the first one here, used paperback copy for $988.
Oh my goodness!
And don't you wish you could have made that kind of money when it was new?
I know. Well, I can't complain. I really can't complain because it did. It was a really a good selling book because there wasn't anything like it. And it was just before Amazon sort of took away the margins in the book publishing industry, and so that really helped me along. I say, it paid for pretty much all of my kids' braces and all of that. It was really good, but the best part about it was it was really a lot of fun because concepts came up that I wasn't aware of before I started doing the series, and one of them is. Jay Leno actually said to me, I don't want anybody to see my garage because everybody I've shown it who is a journalist comes in and says, how much is all this worth? And he says, I don't care what the money is. That's not why I'm doing it. And so he was turned off by all of that. And he started saying, I'm not doing this for money. It's actually costing me a lot. And somebody needs to preserve all these things. And so I guess I'm the next guy. And a lot of other collectors said the same thing. And they hadn't talked to him or anything like this. And they say, we don't consider ourselves owners at all. We know the cars will outlive us. So we are just the next guy in line to take care.
You're stewards of the
right. We are the caretakers of these things, or the curators, the stewards,
Right,
and
custodians.
or you know, the nurses in some of them, because they were not all healthy. I mean, the cars weren't all healthy, and so
I've had cars like that. Yeah.
so those kind of nuanced glimpses into why somebody has 100 cars or 50 cars or something like that. It's an obsession, and but they're driven not by collecting assets. They're driven because the history is really important to them. Most of the guys say the fun part about collecting a car is doing the research before you get it. And so I believe them.
Well, I mean, there are obviously some exceptions to that description. I mean, you know, people like the Sultan of Brunei, who had thousands of cars, most of which had never been driven.
Right.
They were just gathering dust and rotting in a warehouse in Brunei. But I mean, that's a rare exception. But I think you're right. I think a lot of collectors fit into that category. Yeah, and the ones that I find the most interesting are people like Jim Glickenhaus, who, you know, he got very wealthy. I can't remember exactly how, but he's got an amazing collection of cars, and most of the cars that he has are one of a kind, and you know, these one of a kind cars that don't exist anywhere else in the world. He goes out and drives them on a regular basis. Like, for example, he's got a 1967 Ford GT Mark IV, you know, the car that finished second at Le Mans in 1967 behind the Dan Gurney AJ Foyt car that's in the Ford Museum. That is currently the only running Mark IV, and over the years that he has owned it, he has put on more than 40,000 miles on public roads. It's the only one that's ever been registered for use on public roads, and he's put 40,000 miles on that thing. You know, and he's had other cars that he's had custom built, like the Ferrari P45 that you know, he's got I think about 30,000 miles on that one. The Dino Competizione concept that he drives on a regular basis, and you know, now the the white one, the other concept that he just bought a couple of years ago. I can't think of it now. The Modulo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's been having that restored over the last couple of years since he bought it. And when I talked to him
that's
last year.
Bertoni or Bertoni. Yeah, that's right.
And you know, once that's done, he's going to drive that one too. So
that's great. I mean, that actually, after I started the first garage book, that sort of, I had to limit it to a lot of people were concerned that it was just going to be collectors that hoarded cars, and you know, there's all sorts of people in that industry, and but I made a rule: the cars had to run, and the garage had to be a working garage. So I looked for a toolbox, because just to call it a garage, I mean, if you just parked a bunch of cars indoors, that's a museum to me. So I made sure they had facilities in there that it was you were able to work on a car, and that the cars were real and not just sort of mothballed display items. And but it wasn't an easy black and white line. You know, I made some exceptions somewhere just for some guys that I don't know. Most of the cars were in pieces, and they were doing restorations and things like that. But it really opened it up, and sort of, what did I call it? It was a place. Before I knew the data that we only drive our cars 4% of the time we own them, it occurred to me that I was I was building a Beck Spider in my garage in Birmingham, Michigan, and I had the garage you couldn't see from the house, and so I had built this car and I had it in the garage, and I could never see it, because it's pretty impractical in the winter. You know, it's like having a motorcycle collection. You'll never see it. And so I had to, before I finished the car, I actually built a deck on the back of the house that extended to the garage. So I have a place to sit and look at it when it was done. And so there was that, you know, the things you don't think about, what you need to enjoy a car is, you know, it's got to park somewhere. And so you need a garage that's pretty, or a garage that is livable, that can accommodate humans, so you can stand around with the car. And so, I grew up like that. I had a lot of friends, and all we do is hang around in garages, and they would make strange things and rebuild strange things, and that's sort of where I was attracted.
So one of these days you got to write a story about Richard Truitt, though.
Oh,
he's been posting pictures of his.
I asked
his Rover.
I asked his wife Christine if what does your garage look like, because I'd never seen it, and she said, "Well, we just got a new one that's off the house just because we ran out of room," and she said, "But it's not very nice inside. You don't want to see it. It's not decorated or anything." And no, that's not the point. But
it's what's inside,
sometimes can you sit around there and what they used to call bench race, and can you just sit there on a workbench and hang out and talk about the car? It's one thing that summed it up for me. I did as I was covering the M1 Concourse garage racetrack condo complex that just opened up in Pontiac. It was in 2017, I think. Or was it before? Last year?
16,
okay.
Yeah.
But it's very recently opened up. And I talked to the guy who was the first buyer of a condo there, and he was an ex-GM engineer. And he said his wife was terribly afraid that if he bought one of those, she'd never see him again. But he said, I can't relate to anybody who plays golf. And, he said everybody at GM all plays golf. And he said, I need to relate to people who relate to cars. And that was sort of summed it up to me as there are guys in garages all over Southeast Michigan that nobody ever sees. And you know what I mean? Now here's a chance where they're coming out of the closet and they can relate to people through cars. I think it's really fun that, all these secret solitary guys who are preserving all the cars. Now they have a place. We can,
It is a solitary pursuit for sure. It has its times where it's a craft, and it's a sort of a singular craft. I when I'm working on cars, I have this. It's hard to sort of be the team leader, right? Or like work on cars with someone else. It's if you're together with someone and you're there working on the car, like generally you're either shooting the breeze or one person's watching the other person work.
Yes. Yes. And that's important though, because I've spent a lot of time with buddies who've raced and I will go and talk to them and watch them work on their car. But they have, they have an objective in mind for how they want something done, and it's not something that's you can't read their mind. And so, I have enjoyed that a lot. I mean, there's also a man cave facet to it, and that's probably something that's in our DNA. And that when men are dealing with the travails of life, they don't sit around in a knitting circle and verbalize what's been going on. They tend to, seek inside quiet space, and that's what a man cave is for. And a garage is such an embodiment of that concept, where you just, if things aren't working, you just go in the garage and start fixing something, and then pretty soon you say, okay, that worked. Now I'll try real life stuff. You get
it's an outlet,
going.
Right? It's a craft. It's I find myself, because I don't have a garage, so in these lovely winter months, I've done my time out in the driveway in coveralls, insulated coveralls, and stuff has to get done. I'll do it. But like in the winter, if I need that sort of craft outlet, I'll wind up like baking or like, something. I'll turn to some other kind of skill.
Right.
That is sort of the same thing. You're following the process. You're looking for a particular outcome. So
you work with your hands. You work out your feelings come out through your fingers. And so Well,
this is no longer Wheelbearings. This is wheel psychology chat.
No, it's great. Speaking of driving, so the next segment that I was telling you, Phil, that we usually do is what we're driving, and what are you driving this week?
This is Phil. I'm driving a Bolt, which isn't a new one. I think it's a 2017, but my specialty is going in and trying to find out what idiosyncrasies there are and how to hack it and how to make it work like we want it to work versus how GM maybe wants us to have it work. So I had driven in the several years ago. I had driven an e-Golf in a terribly bitter winter week we had, and so it was 20 below, and the range of the car was very small. It was like 35 or 40 miles, and just because it was really cold. And so I drove home one night going below the speed limit, so I'd only have to use low beams. I didn't use the wipers, even though there was a mist on the windshield. I never turned the heat on, and I was bundled up. And that actually happened to me way back in the 70s when I drove across the country in a blizzard in a Beetle that the heater had failed. And so I was wrapped up in a sleeping
No, the heater
bag.
was fine. It was just a Beetle.
It wasn't. They were really picky about. Yeah, I mean, you really had to have them working right just to survive. But this was across Nebraska, 40 below or something. But in any case, so I was my own, optimizer of the battery, and I was not using the brakes, so the brake lights wouldn't come on. I was all of these things I was doing to sort of save energy to make it. It reminded me of the guys in Apollo 13 when they were saying they had that meter attached to what's the procedure to get back home? We only have this much electricity.
How long is our oxygen going to hold out?
Exactly. And so I wanted to see if I could find some things like that about the Bolt, and that's why I'm in it. And basically, I mean, it's really foolproof. There's really not much I can do to improve the way that it runs, and I'm trying to think. There are some weird things about getting it through a car wash, how it stays in neutral, and it really wants to not stay in neutral. And so you have to have your foot on the brake, then open the door, then take your foot off the brake after you shift to neutral. And something about opening the door tells the computer, okay, don't put it back in drive, which it wants to do automatically after 5 seconds if it's in neutral. So other things like that. That's my interest in it. I want to see if I can hack it. I want to see if I can do a hypermile or something.
Have you considered taking off the roof rack?
Yeah. No,
I'm sure that's not doing great things for the aerodynamics.
No, but I just brought 13 sheets of drywall back to my house on the top of the Bolt, and it was pretty cool sight in a Home Depot lot. So that wasn't the normal.
The Bolt isn't really a crossover,
right?
Well, with the sheetrock up there, it's a wing, so you get going fast enough, you actually get off the ground and you'll fly for a little bit until you lose some speed and you touch back down, accelerate again. So
I know
you actually get more mileage.
I'm curious. Are you driving it in low or in drive?
Oh, in low. Okay. I'm driving in the one pedal version, which is something that when I drove a Tesla way back in 2014, I think it was, that was basically a one pedal car back then, and I really liked that. And so the Bolt works really good at that, but until you get used to it, most of the time it sort of throws you forward when we're not in the habit of cars braking when we lift off on the right foot, and but that's a minor thing. I think
it just takes a few minutes to get used to how you modulate the accelerator, because most cars, when if you just take your foot right off the accelerator pedal, it's not going to slow down that fast,
right? And
once you get used to instead of going all the way off, come back maybe halfway or something, and you learn pretty quickly to adjust that. And I'm curious, have you driven the BMW i3?
Yes, I have.
Because the i3 is, it's the only one that actually does that really strong regen by default. Everybody else, GM and Nissan now on the new Leaf, it's a mode you have to engage to do that. Although on the Leaf, they once you select e-pedal mode, it will actually remember that. So the next time you start the car, it'll start in that same mode. Whereas the Bolt, you have to put it in low every time.
And
it'd be nice if they made that an option to have that as the default mode.
It's also with the shift lever. I mean, you have to actually, it's not just a button saying regen. And although there is a paddle on the left side of the Bolt that you can manually go into regen. And I see a lot of value in that. If we were in the mountains or something coming down a hill, you could just regen your way all the way down to get in and out of traffic. And one thing I haven't investigated, but I'm going to, and maybe Sam, you can help me tonight, is I want to find out if the brake lights come on when you're regen. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I usually have to wait till night and look and see if they reflect in a sign or something.
Yeah. Once you get over about 0.05, 0.06 Gs, I think, of decel, which is what you would normally get from engine braking. Once you get beyond that, then the light, regardless of whether you're using the brake pedal or regen, it will turn on the brake lights.
Well, one of my ulterior motive for this is that I've always done this, and I learned in the 70s during the 55 mile an hour emergency speed limit to use the handbrake to slow down, because pretty much when you're on a freeway and there are radar traps everywhere, the person whose brake lights comes on gets pulled over more often than the person whose don't, because it's
also,
evidence.
Did you pull the bulbs out?
The what?
The bulbs?
No, I used to have a fuse switch in cars, but that was in the old days before there were ECUs. But the
other thing that happens is when you use the regular brakes, that the front brakes engage and the car nosedives. So if you use the parking brake, it's typically on the rear wheels.
It squats.
There's not as much nosedive, right? It doesn't really call attention to itself.
Yes, and I kind of like
those tricks are still alive.
I know. I kind of like using that stealth mode, because if you're in New Jersey, and New Jersey people drive a little different than the rest of us, differently, and what happens is they play traffic. If you look like you're going to cut in front of somebody, then they'll close the gap, and that's just how traffic works. And so you don't want anybody to see brake lights unless you choose to, and you never use a signal when you're, and so, I mean, this is not something I'm recommending. This is just an observation that it's probably going to play all kinds of havoc with programs for autonomous cars, because they won't speak the language, or they're learning to speak the language.
Would be the last place where we deploy autonomous cars.
Anyway, I didn't mean to ramble on there.
Vehicles first before they put them there.
So, but anyway, but what happened once was when GM. When daytime running lights came out, we had a Saturn that we were testing at the magazine, and every time you pull on the handbrake, it turns off the DR.
That's right. All GM cars do that. You'd pull the handbrake up one click, and it would shut off the DRLs.
Right.
Wait,
and so
why did they do that?
What ends up? I don't know. I don't exactly know why, but I wrote about it, and they were really mad at me, saying, "No, you shouldn't use the handbrake to stop." And I'm going, "Well, it's not to stop; it's so the cop doesn't know you were going too fast." And so, but in their case, though, when you pull up, it's the running lights break, and I'm trying to think. We figured out a hack for that, and I'm trying to think what that was. Oh, we would drive with the car, and the handbrake was up 2 clicks, because the tolerance of the cable was so loose that it didn't enact. And I tested. That's
loose
what
tolerances on a Saturn? You must be joking.
No,
that's what they were mad at me about. Was because I wrote about it in Car and Driver, and I said just leave it up 2 clicks, and the DRLs won't even come on; they'll stay off, and then you can pull it on.
There was a lot of backlash to daytime running lights back when they first started becoming real common.
Yeah.
And I remember the Saturn ones in particular. Everybody complained that GM running lamps were too bright, and there were a lot of people that just hated them. I kind of just I was driving rear wheel drive Volvos for most of the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
So I just left the lights on all the time anyway.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
So I didn't mind.
I did that too. I mean, from very early, growing up in Canada, from very early on, in my driving life, just got in the habit of turning on the lights because, especially, late in the day, especially during the fall and winter, and early spring, when the sun was often, lower in the horizon than in more southerly areas, it made a big difference, in terms of being able to see other cars, especially cars coming at you, but, also, cars in your mirror and so on, to get past the glare of the sun.
There's also a real established communication protocol with headlights, and that is if you ever are on a freeway with a bunch of semis, when it's okay for them to pull in front of you, you turn off the low beams and turn them on. You flash them on and off. You don't hit the high beams, and when you do that, it isn't just saying it's clear for you to pull in front of me. You're also saying, yeah, I'm paying attention. I'm not on my phone. So it reminds me of, I just was in a Continental shuttle. It's the French maker of the shuttle, the one that was in Vegas. Yeah.
Okay.
And they have them running around at their headquarters and autonomously. And what they do is they have these lights that look like eyes in the front of it, and they blink like an eyelid blinking whenever they see another car to let the other car know they see him. And so it's it's more than just, say, a radio communication, or it's a backup to something, but there's this visual indicator that the autonomous car sees you when it blinks its eyes, which I found similar to that.
That's something a lot of designers, user experience designers are looking at. They're experimenting with how to communicate. How to do nonverbal communication, because we do it all the time. You come up to a four-way stop, you might wave your hand to signal for somebody else to go first or whatever, or if you're waiting, if you're in traffic and somebody's trying to pull out of a parking lot, and if you're stopped, you wave to them and you give them the signal, go ahead in front of me. So we do that as humans all the time. And as we move into a world of automated vehicles, where there may not be a driver to do that kind of signaling, or also, for pedestrians, or other motorists to have an idea of what that vehicle is going to do, giving those kinds of signals is going to be important. And I think, we ran an interview earlier this year that I did up at management briefing seminars with Melissa Sefkin from Nissan. And I don't know if you've ever talked to her, but she's an anthropologist, and the area that she's studying is this whole area of user experience and user interaction with automated vehicles, particularly on the outside and more so than on the inside of the vehicle, and how pedestrians are going to interact with these vehicles, and how you control the vehicles to give those kinds of signals, in terms of like how they accelerate, if they're stopped, or how to give indications to pedestrians of what that car is going to do before it does it, so that they know if it's safe to walk out or not, before they walk out and hope that the car is going to see them and stop. The
Transportation Research Center in the UK did a study, and I think it was less than a year ago. It just came out maybe at the beginning of summer, and they said that they had test subjects in there that were pedestrians and motorized people in normal cars. And at the end of the study, most of the respondents said that they were comfortable taking more risks, jumping in front of autonomous cars and jumping in front and pulling out in front of autonomous cars when the gap was smaller, because they trusted that they would stop quicker and that they would stop at all. And so it could go either way. It's not that people are afraid of autonomous cars. They're just going to say, oh, I need to get across the street. This I know will stop, and just jump right in front of a car.
Yeah,
so
that's a serious problem that we have to deal with.
I mean, that takes all the sport out of it.
That's true.
Yeah.
So overall, you like the Bolt?
I do. And I think, it's sort of like once I drove it, because I hadn't spent any time in it. I'd driven only other cars. And, once I drive in it and I get really comfortable, and I say, why didn't we have this 10 years ago? I mean, I know why, but it really is one of those, that's how you can tell that it's sorted out well and developed well, is by when you say, well, this is what we should have had all along,
right.
Which is a way of measurement. That's all. It's a subjective measurement of mine, but I like it, and I like it because it's as useful as any compact, subcompact SUV. And you sit up high. I mean, they have this formula where it has to look odd enough that that it stands out from a normal car, because it's what's the word? People, I've noticed, tend to give it more of a right of way. And I'll explain. In crosswalks and things like that, when the IMEV Mitsubishi came out, it's a very weird looking car. It's a rear drive, tiny little tires, looks like a golf cart halfway, and or at least out in the Midwest it does. And when I was driving it in Portland, and Portland is, kind of a city where there's a lot of free thinkers and stuff. And so I was with Bengt Halverson from Car Driver Now, and we were driving on crosswalks and on sidewalks, and we were just blowing right into crosswalks when pedestrians were in it. And so, if you did that in California, they'd scream and yell at you, and they'd swear at you and be stuff like that. But I was just sort of testing, what did they think of the car? And they would look at us with this puzzled thing. They wouldn't get angry, and we had the windows down, and I'd say, "Oh, it's okay, it's electric." And then they would smile and say, "Oh, okay, go ahead, just cut right up the sidewalk."
Just because it has a battery it's just to misbehave.
It's like a Fiat 500 parking it in under a staircase or something like that. Everybody, it's people, once they see, if you say it's electric, they'll let you drive on grass. It doesn't matter. Okay, because anyway, I'm
gonna have to use that sometime. I'll roll up in my Crown Victoria and be like, no, it's electric.
They'll probably say, yeah, go ahead. It's not polluting. I don't know. It's a long story.
Well, I had an electrified car until yesterday as well that I was somewhat less enamored with. And it was the Toyota Prius C, which it was interesting. When Toyota launched this thing, about a decade ago, they first started talking about launching a family of Priuses, because the Prius was kind of at its height at that point. Right before the financial meltdown, gas was $4 a gallon. Everybody was trying to get rid of their SUVs and their trucks and get into little cars and hybrids. And at that point, the Prius was still relatively pricey. The price has come down a little bit since then, or it hasn't climbed as much as some other cars. And so Toyota wanted, both Toyota and Honda both, came up with plans to create more affordable hybrids. Honda came up with the Insight, which we'll come back to a little later. And Toyota did the Prius C, and they also added the Prius V to the lineup, a little bit bigger, kind of wagon version of the Prius. But the Prius C was actually a completely different platform from the regular Prius, and a smaller engine, less electrical power, smaller battery. And it was designed to be more affordable, and it shows on the inside. It's when you get into most newer small cars now, they, compared to what we had 10 or 15 years ago, they tend to have much nicer interiors. They're more amenities and better materials. The Prius C does not. But
that's like a Toyota thing, though. Toyota interiors are just not good.
Yeah, up until fairly recently, that has generally been true, especially on our smaller cars. I mean, the Corolla is still kind of a cheap feeling interior, and the Prius C is very much so. And the thing is, the Prius C now, although it was designed to be a more affordable member of the Prius family, the current, for 2017 or 2018, the starting price is like $20,600. Which is several $100s more than a loaded Honda Fit. And the Prius C is smaller. The back seat's much more cramped than the Honda. And the one I was driving was the top trim level, the Prius C4, and it was priced at like $26,400, which is about $2,400 more than the Honda Civic hatchback that my wife and I bought last spring. And the Civic is a much, much nicer car than the Prius is. I got about 41 miles per gallon over the week with the Prius C. But our Honda gets like 34. And, it would take you a decade, to save in fuel, the price difference between those cars. And even more so if you went with the Honda Fit, which is a much more fun car to drive than the Prius C, much roomier, much more practical. And, gets, can easily get, mid-30s fuel economy. I think the thing is, now you can buy a standard Prius, starting at about under $23,000. I got to wonder why Toyota even bothers to keep this one in the lineup. Because it just it doesn't offer much. This loaded one, didn't have adaptive cruise control. Had automatic emergency braking, but that was about it. And I think when this one runs its course, probably in the next year or two, I doubt that Toyota will bother to replace it because it's just not worth it at this point. And they don't sell very many of them anyway. But it's no fun to drive. It's slow.
I disagree. That's my favorite Prius. It's
C?
It's like,
have you driven the C?
Yeah. I mean, it has been a while, and I'd certainly admit that the new TGNA regular Prius is a lot better than it used to be. So some of the entertainment factor that you got in the Prius C, and I use the word entertainment kind of loosely.
Yeah, if you like a noisy engine, that revs up to 4,500 and sits there as constantly as you're accelerating up to highway speeds and seemingly forever.
It is. It's noisy. It's I prefer to call it visceral. It's one of the more visceral Toyotas, and it has that direct steering. It's light.
Visceral. This is just noisy.
Okay, it's a cheap visceral Toyota. I don't know. While you're eviscerating it, it's okay. I do think that you're dead on in terms of it being like. It's not a good value. It's loud and tinny and feels cheap. I think the thing that I liked about it was just the directness of the controls, which if I have to be in a Prius, I'm expecting that it's going to be soft and sort of spongy. And that was the biggest surprise with the Prius.
Yeah,
C.
it didn't really feel spongy. That is true. But they did a refresh on it, a styling refresh on it for 2015. They gave it a revised front fascia, and it's got these, black plastic wheel arch extensions, and the bottom of the front fascia has what looks like a faux skid plate on there. Clearly they were trying to make it look more like a quote unquote crossover.
Too bad.
If you want a hybrid crossover, forget this thing. Buy a Kia Niro. The Kia Niro is more of a crossover. Mm-hmm. It has a lot more room inside. It barely, it only costs you can get a Niro for about $1,500 more than this thing for a base price, and it's got a lot more features in it. You've got Android Auto and CarPlay, and it gets better fuel economy. I got 50 miles per gallon out of the Niro FE. So there's like zero reason to ever buy this car. Yeah, no,
I agree. I feel like the Niro is certainly almost twice the car that the Prius C is, and it's just you don't suffer in something like the Niro. That you definitely are. You're making sacrifices for the art in the Prius C for sure. It's an old car now, though. It was introduced at a time where they wanted to do the sort of same sausage, different lengths thing that the Germans do so well. The success of the regular Prius was like, well, let's just expand the Prius line. And this was, like you said, 10 years ago.
In principle, it was a great idea. It's just, I'm not sure that it was executed particularly well.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Yeah, but I'm in the middle between you guys because, I like cars that aren't overly muted and overly coddled and where actually you can hear things going on. There's a comfort for me in hearing engine noise because if it ever changes pitch, then I know something's wrong. And so,
I like engine noise as much as anybody.
Yeah,
but there are engine noises, and then there are noises that come from engines. This is a noise that was coming from an engine.
That's true,
as opposed to an engine noise.
You have an engineering background, so Sam. So that's it. That's showing. No, but also there is also something about that I think that they sort of vacillated on taking the franchise with the Prius name, because it's kind of just saying a Prius. It's become its own, I guess they call it virtue signaling. Because you have a Prius, you deserve to be in the HOV lane more than everybody else. And it has nothing to do with the car. It's a political statement.
Yeah, which is crazy because when you think about it, right, you're and I've used this phrase before, you're consuming your way to conservation. And so because you buy a new thing, you get to ride in the HOV lane solo? Like, no. Yeah. The people with the 15-year-old cars that keep them going, who have not caused the more strip mining of raw materials and all the energy that goes into building a car, those are the people who should also get into the HOV lane. That would certainly put us out of work if everybody continued to just fix their cars and not buy new ones. But the virtue signaling, like you say, is kind of hilarious and sad at the same time.
Well, I mean, that virtue signaling, is exactly what, I mean, the thing about the Prius was it always had a distinct look to it, the original, the standard Prius. And, so that's why, for example, when Honda did the second generation Insight, it had a particular shape that very much echoed the Prius, and now, the Hyundai with the Ioniq, has done the same thing. It very much echoes the Prius, although it loses the weird, but the overall profile is very similar to the Prius, because they are deliberately trying to do that virtue signaling, which if you look at the sales for the Nero versus the Ioniq for the hybrids, I mean, mechanically they are exactly the same vehicle, but the crossover clearly way outsells the Virtue. There's far more people interested in a crossover body style than in signaling their Virtue with those cars, because it sells about 2.5 times as much as the Ioniq. But hey, we'll see how that goes. Dan, what about you? What are you driving?
I was also driving a Toyota that I'm sort of less than keen on. I had the Corolla SE, the 6-speed manual. And I mean, I don't think it's going to fool anyone. This is a car that overall, this is the car for people who don't like cars. They don't even want to have a car. They just have to because they have to. They don't like to drive. It's a chore. They don't want to be hassled. And the Corolla has always been the sort of non-hassle car. So the SE with the manual transmission is this odd duck. And the version that they sent me had a $700 TRD exhaust system on it. It's just obnoxious.
I have one of those ones.
At least should stop with that. It's just so annoying. And there's no power from it's got a tiny 1.8 liter engine. And I mean, there's tinier engines out there that do better. I shouldn't say tiny. It's gutless. I could never figure out the throttle response. In first gear or as you're going to launch it, the clutch is very vague. So you wind up revving up to 4,000 RPM just because it decided to do that. Like, what are you doing, car? It's a Corolla that's been sort of tarted up with like performance theater. And the Corolla itself it's not a bad car. It's dull. It's not meant to be exciting. It's meant to just, be the car that you get in, it works. It's the washing machine of cars in that sense. And it's not an insult. That's just an observation. That's what it is. And so, the Corolla is decently roomy. It has a big back seat. It has a decently roomy trunk. It's built well. The interior materials are terrible. The seats are, they look nice. They feel okay.
But it'll run for 20 years with nothing but oil changes and tire rotations.
Yeah, but I feel like they're not aggressively stretching either to improve or to lead the pack. They're resting on their laurels to a degree, because you go from the Corolla to something like a Hyundai Elantra, and they're in the same class. The Elantra feels, much nicer in terms of materials and design and the technology that you can get. Although the Corolla does have the TSSP, the Toyota Safety System Plus or whatever now, it's a standard equipment. But it's just, it feels like, yep, we built this car and we're going to make it cheap because nobody who buys them cares, and we sell a lot of them and they run forever, and so screw you, we're not going to put that much effort into it.
Well, I think this is probably the last generation of Corolla where they'll take that approach, because if you look at the new Camry, they've clearly moved beyond that with the Camry. I mean, the Camry was always very much in that same kind of vein. It was incredibly effective but totally dull. And the new one, is not that in any way. And my guess is that when we see the next generation Corolla, probably in the next year or so, that it will follow the Camry down that similar path.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it looks great on the outside. I think the styling is real nice. The interior is not, the layout and the design and the ergonomics they're not bad. It's just it feels like it's a mediocre car that is excellent at being mediocre, and that's fine because people buy them, and I guess we need those kind of cars on the market. But it doesn't stir the soul. So then there's this sort of like discongruousness to it. That's a hard word to parse. Anyway, like it just doesn't fit. Like, don't put the stupid exhaust on it or the noisy air filter and make it look like it's some kind of performance thing when it's not. Like, I like the manual transmission, although the clutch was super vague, so I could never figure out where it engaged. And it would do weird things with the throttle response, so you could never really get off a smooth shift. A lot of cars do that. This one's particularly bad at it. But I just got to the point where I wanted the LE or the just the regular trim without the stiffer suspension and the noisy muffler and a manual. Like that'd be okay. It's an appliance that I shift. Okay.
What do you think about manuals? I mean, I
love them.
Yeah. I mean, we all do, and I'm just thinking. It surprises me. Yeah, it surprises me they still have that, and I regret it because. Basically, every car that passes the 200,000 mile test is, if it doesn't have a manual, it's not going to make it that far, just because they just last forever. And you can even drive them when they're broken. We've done this.
If they break in the right way.
Right. All you got to do is remember to park, facing downhill, so you can get that rolling start.
Exactly.
Once you get that momentum, then you can shift without ever using the clutch.
Right.
You can roll start them in reverse.
Well, that's true. Fine. Yeah. It's a little more challenging, if you have to go from reverse back to a forward gear, it's a little more challenging, but
you can't do that with a twin clutch or a CVT or any planetary automatic at all. And so it's sort of like if you are looking at it as an appliance that all you want to do is for it to last, I mean, the mechanically sensible choice is a manual. Plus, I had when my son first started driving, he drives my Miata, and after he had been driving for a few months, he said to me, I can't text in this car because I have to shift. I can't, it's not possible. It's too hard to try and talk to somebody via text while you're shifting. And I said,
you can use speech to text and work.
I know. And I thought, well, there's one benefit for a manual right there.
Yeah.
Plus,
well, it is. It's almost like, that's why I think people like to ride motorcycles, because it requires all of your attention.
Yes.
And certainly driving a manual doesn't require that much focus, but it requires more than an automatic. And I definitely agree if you just want the car to last forever. And that's one of the things that I sort of felt about this Corolla was like, it's just going to keep going and going and going. It doesn't have a turbo. It's got a pretty well-proven engine that, while it feels gutless, is just, it doesn't care if you wring its neck or not. It's not going to break. The manual transmission, all you got to do is put clutches and throw-up bearings in them, and they generally last. If you know how to shift, they might, that, what's the synchro that always wears out? The 2-3 synchro?
Yeah, that's usually the one.
Yeah. But even that, like, that's a lot less expensive to repair.
Right.
if you ever need it than something like an automatic transmission. I got rid of a car because it had an automatic transmission problem that I kind of knew what it was and knew how to fix it. It was just a lot more involved than something like a clutch or, and having it rebuilt was too expensive. So it was like, well, I guess I'll have to do it or not. And I gave up.
Well, you can still drive a manual with the synchros not working. I mean, if it hasn't shattered into too many pieces and it's just laying in the bottom, it's very. So what you gain out of that is the flexibility of choosing when to fix it.
Yes, exactly. And,
until it decides to shatter.
And if safety officials really cared about eliminating driver distraction, they wouldn't be putting all this effort into autonomous vehicles and everything. They would just say the only car you're allowed to drive is a manual transmission Miata, because now you no longer have distraction. The car is it. You can't text. You can't do any of this other stuff. All you can do is drive. If everybody in America drove nothing but manual transmission Miatas, fatalities would go to zero. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I don't agree with the outcome of your hypothesis, but I feel like we should test it.
It works for me. Speaking of driving appliances, before we started recording, Phil and I were sitting here chatting, and he brought up this interesting concept, a book that was written by someone about the idea of the $0 car. And so, Phil, why don't you give us a little primer on the idea behind the $0 car?
Isn't that your parents' car?
Well, it was actually written by the technology advisor on staff at Ford to Mark Fields,
John Ellis.
Yes, John Ellis, and he had the book is fascinating glimpse into the car industry from a non-car guy. He's a free thinker. Yeah, I thought he's really insightful about how exactly the data. Big data works and how that affects the car industry. And his premise is that what's more valuable than the car is the data that it will eventually generate. Now, cars have 14 cameras on them, and it was the part that really stuck out for me was this great thing where. Basically, if autonomous cars or cars that are connected that have a lot of driver systems, they're able to read license plates. They're able to exactly pinpoint everybody else's speed on the road. Why do we need cops if we have connected cars? Because they will just report and tattle on everybody who's speeding. And those people whose cars can do that can sell that data. And we won't need radar guns and stuff like that. And I thought, what a fascinating premise that is. And so
you find that fascinating?
Yeah,
I find that freaking terrifying.
Oh yeah, exactly. But you can hack it. I mean, there are polarized covers you can put on your license plate, and you can play with stuff like that the radar detector guys still do these days. But you can hide amongst the zebras if you understand what I mean. If you pick how to cloak your car right, then you won't succumb to that. But the thing is that now, you look at where is the cash, the cash path with a car going. If you're selling the weather data from your car to the weather service, if you're selling license plate photos to whoever wants them, if you're selling who, what, where, when, and why data of all the other cars on the road, somebody wants to know who's going into McDonald's, when did they go. You don't have to have the owner's permission. We're all voyeurs at that point. And if it's the sort of the lessons that we were given in photojournalism school on copyright, on privacy, if you take a photo of somebody on public property, it's free game. You own it. and so who owns the data of who's
Not in Germany?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, wait a second though. As a private citizen, if you're not a public figure, even a paparazzi photo, you're kind of entitled to the right to privacy versus a public figure like an actor or a politician, where you have a reasonable assumption that your movements are going to be tracked and they're interesting.
I'm not sure that's true legally.
Yeah.
I mean,
if you're on
either way,
public property,
snitches get stitches. Don't take pictures of me.
I mean, if you're standing in the middle of Times Square, and somebody snaps a photo,
true.
I don't think you necessarily have any right to privacy there. But
I think what it is if it's published.
Even then, if you're in a public place, I don't necessarily think that. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. We'll have to consult with some legal assistance on that one. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. Now, there are places in the world where I think that is true. Like in Germany, for example, and Google got into a lot of trouble in Germany with Street View, because people decided that they didn't want their houses visible in Street View, or if they happened to be walking down the sidewalk, when the Street View car went by, they did not want their image showing up in Street View, and so at least for people, images of people, Google now by default blurs any people that show up in Street View. But in
what
Germany,
the Germans
for example,
know about surreptitious surveillance, and I don't know. It seems like they don't have much to worry about.
In Germany, you can contact Google and have them blur your house in Street View. I mean, I can go stand on the sidewalk in front of that house and see the house. Why should it necessarily be blurred? Some of it I think goes a little bit too far. I mean, I certainly understand, the desire for privacy, and certainly some of the concepts from this book, the idea of the $0 car, where there will be enough revenue generated from all of the services that can be built on top of the data that our cars generate, that potentially, and this is where it's going. The car effectively becomes free, except that it's not. I don't think it's ever actually going to get to that point where the cost of the car does become free, because I don't. When we have so much data, I don't think that the value of the data is going to be enough to overcome the cost of the vehicle, because basically, it's supply and demand. When you have so much supply of data, I think the value of that data is actually going to decline faster. Just as we've seen with advertising on the internet, for example. There's so much data now. I mean, if you look at Google's financial results, they're the cost per click of ads, that from Google AdSense, has declined precipitously in the last several years, because there's so many ads, there's so many sites, and there's so much data that the value is actually going down. And I think the same thing is probably going to happen with vehicles. I think there will be a significant revenue stream available, but I don't think I seriously doubt it's ever going to get to the point of being able to completely subsidize the cost of transportation.
Well, I mean, I think it's going to. It sounds like what they're really advocating is that Google model, right? Like, here, use this thing.
Yeah.
It's going to be really great, and you're going to love it, and it's not going to cost you anything. You're just going to have to, give us some access. It's all in this big, EULA that you're not going to read, and you're just going to click OK because you want to use the thing. And I've told my kids this and other folks as well, like when something like that happens, we all use Gmail. Well, guess what? With Gmail, we're the product. We are for sale. Our data is for sale. Most of us are comfortable with that, and it's okay. So it's probably going to happen. And
depends on the value you get from it.
Right. Like Uber, the data that they are collecting is for sale. They don't make money on the rides, and that's going to come home to roost at some point. Yeah. But if you could design it so that, yes, you're spending a little bit on the use of the car, but what you get back is in aggregate more valuable, or you're set up to sort of spend a little here and make a little there. That's one thing. The quality of the data, though, is another good point, because we at the day job, which is in advertising, we don't look at cost per click so much as our sort of holy grail metric is, they're a little bit more granular, like cost per qualified lead or, cost per, actual conversion. Those are really what makes the most sense. And so what we're trying to do is not gather this big net of data that's just full of noise. We want to, efficiently target where are we spending, who are we reaching, how efficiently are we getting to those people and drive the cost of acquisition down. And so, yeah, I mean, I see both sides. There's definitely the data is going to have some value, as terrifying as that is. I mean, I find that incredibly chilling.
Well, it's going to get even worse because it's sort of like, I mean, if you look at rental car companies, they make money off insurance. They make no money renting a car for $20 a day. The car is the vehicle on which you base another business. And that business for insurance companies is risk. And so right now they have no way to tell if you're behaving badly on a back road by yourself. Well, eventually they could convince you to report on yourself, but that's probably not, that's not a likely business model. But if you're out in public and somebody else reports on you, I mean, they're standing to lose. I think the Wall Street Journal last year reported $140 billion if people stop crashing. They will lose that in revenue and for premiums, raising premiums for crashes. And there's many different ways. So they have to replace it with something. And what I have at one of the the connected car seminars I went to, the insurance folks were talking about, well, you don't have to have an accident to be high risk. It's like standing on the edge of the roof of a building or standing in the center of the roof of a building. If you do something and there's no damage, you still get charged more for it. Yeah. And so if you can see somebody doing something that's 0.2% more risky than somebody else, then instantly their insurance premium goes up. And in today's insurance operation, that's free money for them whenever they can find somebody being riskier.
Yeah, like if you go over the speed limit and you get caught, you get a speeding ticket, or you roll through a stop sign.
Right.
Those things are signs of risk that don't necessarily result in an accident. There's no actual loss associated with it, but there are signs of risk that could eventually lead to a loss.
Right. You're putting yourself at a higher risk for that loss at a certain point. Progressive does it with Snapshot, right? You opt in and you do report on yourself.
Yeah. A lot of insurance companies are doing this now. They'll give you this free little dongle that you plug into your OBD2 connector, that's got a cellular radio in it, and it'll transmit, information about your driving patterns back to the insurance company. And right now, you have to, contact your insurance company and they'll send you one of these to plug in, and in return they may knock $5 off your annual insurance premiums, but going forward they won't even have to supply those dongles anymore, because every new car built is going to be equipped with cellular telematics systems. When Jim Hackett, CEO of Ford, did their strategic update a couple months ago, he said, by 2019, 100% of new Ford vehicles are going to be connected. GM, 100% of GM vehicles have been connected for years with OnStar. By 2020, 2021, pretty much every new car sold in America and most of Europe as well will have built-in cellular telematics, which will actually be able to collect a lot more data than those little dongles, because it's tied right into all the systems in the vehicle. And manufacturers are going to be collecting that data, and they're going to be making it accessible to third parties, whether that's insurance companies or service facilities, or all kinds of other stuff that possibilities for new kinds of data services, and there's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue from those services. Now, if you ask the manufacturers, which I have done, they will tell you that all the data coming off the vehicle that you own, the vehicle owner owns that data. The manufacturer is a steward of that data. And if they want to share it with any third party, you have to opt in to that sharing. Now, where that changes is as we go forward into autonomous vehicles. The probability is that you will never own an autonomous vehicle. You will ride in autonomous vehicles. You will use mobility services that provide autonomous vehicles on demand. But you don't own that vehicle. Now the question is, who actually owns that data that's coming off that vehicle? If it's the vehicle owner, well, if it's the manufacturer of that vehicle, if it's GM operating a Maven automated mobility service, they own that data from that vehicle. They can share it with whoever they want. And now, all of a sudden, while, risk is probably no longer so much of an issue there because you're not driving, there's all kinds of other things that can be done with that data. And so there's a lot of questions that are going to need to be answered. There's certainly a lot of potentially lucrative revenue streams for manufacturers and various service providers, companies like Autonomo and Ericsson that are building these data brokerage platforms that are these intermediary layers that will collect data from multiple manufacturers and then make it available through APIs to third-party service providers. But we've got a lot of things to talk about and figure out over the next few years before that becomes widespread.
But Sam, you had said you made a comment that as cars are less likely to crash, your assumption is that risk will go down. But from my opinion of the talks that I've heard from the insurance industry is that's not true, because the forensic cost of studying when a crash actually does happen, it's like an aircraft investigation of a crash. It's the price of investigating who's at fault, who wrote the 6 millionth line of code that led to that crash is going to be far more expensive to investigate any crash that there is. And what that does is it's hypothetical, it's theoretical. So they can attach any value to that cost. If the lawyers are going to charge $5 million to investigate the crash of your $60,000 Tesla, the risk goes up. Even if you never crash it, if you could potentially cost a bunch of legal fees of $5 million, that means the premium for having that kind of risk at your fingertips is going to be more expensive than the car potentially.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
and actually that's something that Mobileye is trying to address. Mobileye is they're the company that makes most of the lane departure warning and lane keeping assist systems that are in most new vehicles. There's a couple other companies like Autoliv and Hitachi that have systems in some cars, but Mobileye is the dominant player right now. They won't necessarily be forever, but they are right now. And one of the things that they've come up with, they're now they got purchased this year by Intel. And one of the interesting ideas they came up with that they published recently was this idea of a responsibility sensitive safety model, which basically is a mathematical formula that from autonomous vehicles, you would collect all the sensor data. So you'd have a running log of the sensor data, for maybe the last 5 or 10 minutes. And if something happens, it would be used in two ways. One way is if something happens, if a crash happens, you take that data of what the sensors were seeing beforehand. Basically, you pump it into this mathematical formula, this complex formula, and you can tell if the autonomous vehicle caused the crash or not. So basically, depending on how far other vehicles were, where they were relative to the autonomous vehicle, whether they were human driven or autonomous doesn't matter. Where other vehicles around are, how far, what speed they're going at, what direction they're going, you can figure out if something that the autonomous car did caused the crash or if it was the other vehicle, which is something, today that's really hard to do. I mean, today, when a crash happens, you see the police officers going out there looking for skid marks on the road and taking measurements, figuring out how long is the skid mark, what speed were they going based on the length of the skid mark and the direction of the skid mark and the damage on this pole or this tree. But now you can really automate all that stuff. And then the other thing that Mobileye wants to do is actually incorporate that model into their autonomous control system, so that basically the last line of defense, before the autonomous control system sends a command to any of the actuators, it'll run it through this model real quick and say, if I do this, will it make this car cause a crash? And if the answer is yes, then it won't do that. It'll do something else. If it doesn't, if it says no, it won't cause a crash, then it allows the signal to go through to the actuators. It's an interesting idea. It won't necessarily work with every kind of autonomous system. It depends on how the software is structured. But so for systems like what NVIDIA does with really complex deep learning algorithms, may not necessarily work with that. But it's an interesting concept, and there's a lot of people looking at it. And I think something like that is what we'll probably end up having in these vehicles in order to both do that forensic analysis and make that forensic analysis possible, but also to try to make the system safer in the first place, so that the automated systems won't actually cause a crash.
But that's kind of there is always a risk to driving. You know what I mean? And so
we'll never
basically
get to zero.
right.
We'll never get to a $0 car. I mean, it's an asymptotic thing. We'll get lower, fewer and fewer crashes, fewer and fewer fatalities. It'll cost up to a point less and less to take a ride from one location to another, but I don't think any of those will ever get to zero.
Look, they're just going to have to figure out some other way to make their business compulsory and fleece the general public.
Fine. There's no doubt they will. Yeah. But I mean, this is one of the areas that insurance companies are looking at. With autonomous vehicles is, how. It's not just the car makers that have to evolve their business model, but insurance companies, service providers. I mean, everybody's got to shift their business models as we move forward.
All right, let's shift our business model. What's our next? What's our next topic?
All right, you want to talk about the Insight or the Cherokee?
I mean, I have more to say about the Cherokee than the Insight.
Okay, let's do Cherokee first then.
Okay.
Have you seen the new Cherokee, Phil?
No, I haven't. Yeah.
They gave it headlights.
Yeah.
Where you think headlights
instead of slants.
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks more conventional.
Well, it looks more like a Jeep.
Yeah, I guess. Certainly when that Cherokee came out a few years ago, was it 2013 now when it came out? 14?
13. Oh, as of 14.
Yeah. It was a thing. It was, it caused some controversy, and that's what you want as a designer.
Yeah.
Some of the reaction was negative for sure, but it's really become normalized as it's gotten out there, and surprisingly, the enthusiasts and us auto writers, we all kind of were a little bit taken aback by it. My initial reaction was like, "Whoa!" To dislike it, and then you start looking at it. Yeah, well, it doesn't. There's some elements of that design that really tie back to like the full size Jeeps, the old Wagoneers and Cherokees. And just you get to a certain point, you can only do round lights and 7 slats so much, and so they tried something, and I think overall it was successful, and it moved the look more toward modernity than just being history. And so they've made it look more conventional, a little bit more bland, less risky, less groundbreaking. And so I think everybody's going to like it. It's going to be fine, but it's a little bit more bland to me.
Well, the 014 Cherokee, when it came out, I was on the launch of that, and because they went to a car platform, they're stuck with a large overhang in front, which is unusual for a Jeep. And there's a lot of sort of styling tricks you can do. Look at an Audi. That's a huge amount of overhang in front, but they managed to make it look not so unbalanced. And so not only did they have the 7 slots and headlights to have to accommodate, they also had to kind of hide the fact that it looked a little like Cudjo's steam tractor with so much overhang in front. It's just not the way Jeeps look. All other compact crossovers in that market, nobody, you look at they look at them as cars. They don't look at them as off-road vehicles. But Jeeps, they have to look like an off-road car, at least going anywhere.
There has to be at least one version of variant of every Jeep that has the Trailhawk badge. Yeah, that qualifies it as a true off-road capable vehicle.
Yeah,
and for what it's worth, GM has done, or Jeep has done an admirable job of taking.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Jeep has done an amazing job of taking, what were otherwise pedestrian platforms and giving them the pieces that they needed to actually make them really capable off road. And at the annual Chrysler What's New event at the Chelsea Proving Grounds, one of the things they do out there is that they have this really amazing off-road test course there, and they had all of the Jeeps available there in Trailhawk form to take through 18 inches of water and over rocks and logs and everything else, and from the Renegade on up to the Grand Cherokee, every one of them handles it with no problem at all. I mean, granted, the Trailhawk versions amount to probably 5% of sales. Actually, it's probably more than that, but it's probably closer maybe to 15%. But I'm guessing it's only a tiny percentage of those people that ever actually take them off road. The reality is, if you get one of those, it can go pretty much anywhere.
It is, and I agree with Sam. It's remarkable how they can take some. I mean, it's no longer the hardware defining where it can go. If you modify a car platform enough, it will do whatever they want it to do. And I mean, and they also put in the equipment to make it do that. The 9-speed transmission and the electronics that allow it to climb up a steep hill on its own. There's 9 different ranges, I think it is, when it's climbing a hill on its own. You don't have to touch the pedals. You could be outside walking next to the car, and it goes from 0.6 miles an hour up to 6 miles an hour with increments. I think maybe it's 10 ranges or something like that. So you could have it going 0.6 miles an hour up a hill and just follow it along on the outside. I don't know. We haven't seen the YouTube video of anybody doing that. So maybe there's something that prevents.
When I was out at Chelsea, they said basically just, put it in 4-wheel drive low, hit this button, put it in 4 low, and just steer.
Yeah.
And just don't even touch the pedals, just steer, and it'll take care of the rest. I mean, it's amazing. So, all of these are, they qualify, as true Jeeps based on off-road capability. Like I said, most owners will never do that, but they can if they want to.
Right. And you know what? They made a stand, and they definitely stood out on the road. And, they look like a Cherokee. They don't look like anything.
What's funny now is they're abandoning that look, just as Hyundai is bringing out the Kona, which adopts that same kind of the slit lights. So it'll be interesting to see how that one does in the marketplace.
So I do wonder though where the new Compass sort of leaves the Cherokee, because it's so. They're all like right on top of each other now. The Compass, the Cherokee, and the Grand Cherokee. They're just so tightly sort of slotted. You could almost lose one. You could and be okay, unless you're Chrysler and you want to sell everything.
Yeah, well, I think as long as people keep buying them, they'll keep filling in more niches. I mean, look at every manufacturer. It's not just FCA. It's everybody. I mean, look at BMW. They started off with the X5, and then they added the X3, and then they took the X5 and cut off the rear roof line and made it an X6, and then they added the X1 and the X2 in between, and the X4, and now the X7. So I mean, they're filling in every tiny little niche they can.
as long as there's enough numbers for them to use. I mean, that X1 and X3, it always confused me because they are on the same platform, and I kept thinking, shouldn't one be shorter? Or, well, I mean, shouldn't one be a different?
On the mini platform, the front wheel drive platform.
That's the Transverse?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
The X3 and the X5 are on the same platform.
Right. There I'm mixed up. Okay.
I mean, it'll be great when they start using some of the algebraic symbols. And it's not like BMW doesn't have
X Alpha,
history of that,
X Omega, X
yeah, or this is the imaginary unit.
Yeah, there you go. XE.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they did do ADAs, right? The 528E back in the day.
Yeah, they did do that. I forgot about that.
The economy car.
Yeah. Wow, well, I think we've exhausted ourselves on the Cherokee. Yeah. What else is there to say?
Especially since we don't actually know anything about the new Cherokee except that they changed the front fascia and the tail lights. There will be more information coming at the Detroit Auto Show. They promised some updated powertrains and other stuff, but we'll hear about that in a few weeks.
All right. So what's next?
We alluded earlier to the Honda Insight, in talking about the Prius C, and the Insight badge is back again for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me. But the last Insight, as I said before, Honda created it as a lower cost alternative to the Prius. It was based on the Fit platform, and it used their IMA mild hybrid system, and it got decent fuel economy. It would get 40 miles per gallon.
Yeah, but it was not good.
But beyond that, it was not particularly good to drive. The ride quality was terrible. And compared to a Fit, it got maybe 5 miles per gallon better than a Fit. But the Fit was already fuel efficient, and you lost a lot of what made the Fit great, in terms of its handling capabilities and its roominess, the packaging of the Fit. I mean, the amazing thing about the Fit is it's fun to drive, and it has this incredible package with so much room inside a really small car. And, the Insight, chopped off the roof, so you had a lower roof line. You lost a lot of space inside, shorter wheelbase, so you lost a lot of rear leg room, and got slightly better fuel economy, and it wasn't worth it. Now, this time they're taking a different approach to the new 2019 Insight, going more upscale with it, and they released some images of it 2 days ago, and I actually saw it in person last night, and it looks really good. It looks like the current generation Civic, kind of a cross between the elements of the Civic sedan and the new Accord. So it's kind of it's Civic sized, but it's a more toned down appearance. So it looks a little more sophisticated, a little less angular than the Civic. But more sophisticated. Have you seen it?
No, so it's not a Lexus look of angular.
No,
sharp. Okay. I mean, I'm just saying that as a generic. Well, the Insight. Is that? I remember I actually knew two people who bought Insights. The first one that came out,
the original two-seater?
right, with the spats over the rear wheels.
Yeah,
and that one was more of a science experiment. It was all aluminum, really lightweight, two-seater with that same mild hybrid system, and it was really fuel efficient, but it wasn't terribly practical because it was only a two-seater. So this time, they've gone to a more sophisticated-looking four-door sedan body style, and it looks really sharp.
So what does this mean for the clarity, though? Because it sort of feels like it's horning in on some of that territory, where like they're bringing out another hybrid for whatever reason. Well,
the clarity isn't available as a regular hybrid. So this is using the two motor hybrid system that is in the Accord and the Clarity, but it's not. The Clarity is available as fuel cell, battery electric, or a plug-in hybrid. So they're all zero emissions capable. This one is a non-plug-in hybrid. So presumably it's sharing some componentry with it in terms of the powertrain, but it's it's a much more conventional looking car. The Clarity is a little peculiar looking.
What's the range on? Can you go battery only on the Insight?
They haven't given any of those details yet. I mean, they're saying it's a hybrid only. So, presumably, you'll be able to go a mile and a half on battery if you get it, fully charged. If you do a lot of regen and charge it up, but it's not a plug-in. So, it's going to be more Prius-like in that respect.
So it's an ultra high mileage.
Yeah,
that's basically what it is. And then, which I don't know, are they suspecting fuel might go up in cost or something? I mean, that makes sense at $4 a gallon.
Yeah,
but are there other tricks?
We don't know. They always, those details are not available yet until the auto show. So we'll find out more in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And Honda always goes their own way with engineering. They're kind of committed to looking at things with an objective approach, saying what makes this tick. Sometimes they do it like everybody else. Sometimes they do it the Honda way. And so I'll be interested to see what happens.
Yeah, well, I think like I said, we'll probably see a lot of component sharing in the powertrain between this and the Clarity plug-in and the Accord hybrid. The Accord hybrid, I think is rated about 49 miles per gallon, or the last one was. I wouldn't be surprised. They're saying it's a compact, so I wouldn't be surprised if it hit 50 miles per gallon or more. Similar in size to the Ioniq and the Prius. So it should be able to hit that 50 mile per gallon mark, something that the previous Insights never managed, or the last Insight never managed. The original one did, sort of. But
well, I have a theory about even though it doesn't make full economic sense to be fighting over every half a mile per gallon. At this point, consumers aren't so worried that their monthly budget is shot just between 45 and 50 miles per gallon. I'm not sure about that, but people I know that are now looking at their own carbon footprints and doing crazy things like switching from a 2-car family to a 1-car family, or shopping only in 5 miles radius where they live. Do you think it's aimed at somebody that is trying to minimize and trying to shrink down their dependence on the car? And it's only a theory I have, and I'm wondering what manufacturers may be, if you guys have any theories, what they may be trying to project people's relationship with the car is, as far as, because I've been experimenting over the last year of taking buses and trains and stuff like that, and trying to see how life works without the car being the first thing I think of when I have to go somewhere or get something. So I don't know, it's a stretch, but in that case, if you're not driving a car as a commute, or if you're only using it once a week, even less than the 4% that we use it now, what car would fit in that place? Is this it? This Insight?
I don't know. If that's what you're trying to achieve, try to minimize your car use. My guess is that this car is going to be pricier than a Civic. So probably, starting somewhere around 25 grand and maybe going up to about 30. And particularly because, in the announcement of it, they talked about it being more upscale and, the way it looks and everything. My guess is it will be it'll probably slot in price wise below the Clarity plug-in hybrid, but, above where the Civic is.
But I think
it may be more of, the virtue thing we talked about earlier, where, because, they've given it a distinct look, that it shows it as part of the current Honda family, but it's also clearly not a Civic and it's not an Accord. So, it doesn't have the weird of a Prius, but it is distinct. And so maybe that's what they're going for some of that market. Granted, that's a shrinking market here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And, Prius sales have been declining for the last several years. So I'm not sure what they're trying to achieve.
I think
they
if
just
you
want to get their cafe up, so that they can sell more pilots.
Ridge lines. Yeah.
Well, I think if you're looking to minimize your sort of blast radius, your best bet really is something like a used Leaf. It's electric and it's cheap, and you're never going to use the capacity that's in that battery unless you go on a longer trip. And then if you need to go on a longer trip, there's other ways to
you rent something
get
for
a car.
Yeah, or switch with your neighbors or start vehicle sharing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a 3-year-old Leaf for $10,000 and
I'm putting that. Yeah, I used to. There was a time at which I had 3 2-seat convertibles and kids and grandmas.
Priorities.
And it would always work great because all of my neighbors had an SUV and a minivan, and you just loan them the convertible for a week or 2 weeks, and you go and you put 3,000 miles on their Honda minivan, and they get to put like 60 miles on your convertible, and they think
sharing economy. None of this, paying some guy to drive you around town in an Uber. This is your true spirit of sharing.
But they always thought they got the better end of the deal, and you just go, wow. And so,
sure, thanks.
I don't know. It's a thought. As where does this thing fit in? It sends me out into left field. So.
I'm sure they've done their homework, and they know who they're going to target. It's interesting that it's built alongside the Civic and the CR-V, and I wonder if it means that and Honda tends to be really flexible with their plants, but I wonder if it means that there could be hybrid versions of those at some point rather easily.
I see. Yeah, it could just be a test.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if we don't see a hybrid CR-V sooner rather than later. But, given, that this car has such a similar shape to a Civic, I'm not sure we'll see another Civic hybrid in the foreseeable future. Yeah. I think this really is the new Civic hybrid.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, there's probably something to be said for making it its own sort of standalone car, but a hybrid CR-V is like, that's...
Oh, yeah, that's a no-brainer.
They ought to do that.
That's definitely going to happen. No question about that. All right. One last one I want to touch on real quick. There's a report today that they've confirmed the 20th fatality from a Takata airbag exploding. And as I saw this today, and then about an hour later, I went outside to the mailbox to get the mail, and there was a letter there from Ford in reference to a 2008 Fusion that I own that my younger child drives. And it said, we sent you a recall notice back in July of 2016 for the Takata airbags in your car, and we told you that we hope to have replacement parts available soon, and we'd notify you when the replacement parts are available. And it's now 18 months later, and it said, we still don't have replacement parts. We hope to have them by spring of 2018. Please stand by. This is not a problem unique to Ford. I mean, pretty much every manufacturer that's got Takata airbags has had issues trying to get replacement inflators for those airbags. And there are still tens of millions of cars on the road that have these faulty inflators that are going to need to be replaced at some point. And it's already taken at least 20 lives. And hopefully they get this thing sorted out quickly and get these replacement inflators built and get them into these vehicles before too many more lives are lost.
Well, what do you even do in the meantime?
There's not much you can do. Because I mean, theoretically you could unplug the airbag. You can take it out and pull the thing out. But from what I understand, those inflators, the problem is corrosion, and the inflators can actually go off even if there's no, if there's nothing there. So I don't know there is anything you can do, short of parking the car or taking out the airbag entirely.
That's I'd be curious to know. I mean, some of the airbags have worked in accidents, and so I wonder what the ratio is. Right. Yeah. And so I'm curious. It's up to the owner to balance the risk again. Here we're talking that again, and but the thing is if your Fusion is an '08, there's a huge drop off with 10-year cars. People just not getting any. The return rate on a recall is maybe 20% for 25%, something like that. Is the last figure I heard on when you pass a 10-year-old car. Nobody's taking it for a recall. Yeah. Because number one, they don't trust dealers. There are a number of evidential reasons why people just stop doing it after a certain amount. And it may help reform the recall business on, the last I heard, it was a couple of years ago, that they were talking about, you could make the vehicle non-DOT legal if it hasn't had all of its recalls, and so you couldn't get plates for it or something like that. And I don't know where that's going to go, but it's a huge number of cars that haven't had their recall notices taken.
I think there was about 80 million vehicles,
millions
that were subject to these recalls, and there's still several tens of millions that have not been updated. Granted, 80 million vehicles with these problematic airbag inflators, been 20 fatalities. That's a relatively low rate. But and there's probably several hundred, if maybe several thousand injuries. So the odds of you dying from one of these is pretty slim. But if you do get a notice from your manufacturer that they have parts ready to fix your car, please go ahead and take it in, get it. As soon as possible. Well, don't waste time.
It'll preserve value of the car too. Yeah. So.
All right. Well, why don't we wrap it up? We've been going for quite a while here. Phil,
I'm getting
so
tired.
much.
I'm getting hungry.
Oh, thanks, guys, for having me and letting me ramble on some stories. And I really like this format, so I'd really like to come back someday. But it's been, it's the 2 hours. Goes shooting by.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
All right.
When I get a garage, I'll be asking for decoration advice.
We'll bring Phil out to Boston to take pictures of it.
That's fine.
Don't buy the book on Amazon for $1,000. No, I can get you one a lot cheaper. So.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
If anybody wants copies of of any of the Ultimate Garage's books, just send us an email or send us a tweet, and we will put you in touch with Phil and get you a copy at a much more reasonable price. And it'll be a brand new copy, fresh out of the box.
Signed. It's got to be signed.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes. I'll be happy to. Yeah. With a personal note with it. That's how I like to do it. So.
All right. Fantastic.
All right.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us, Phil.
Thank you, Dan.
We'll have you on again soon.
All right. Fantastic.
Talk to you all next week.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.